Welcome back to our Astro Imaging Journey channel. Today I want to go over the Sequence Generator Pro settings that I use. Last episode I discussed and touched a little bit on some of this since switching over to the focal reducer. So now I just want to put a comprehensive settings video together, and probably after that I will put together how I go through my workflow on putting a sequence together. So let's open up Sequence Generator Pro. Now of course when you have a sequence up there already configured, it's gonna auto-populate everything for you. So let me clear up the screen so we can work fresh. Okay, so the first thing we need to look at, let's look at the control panel and let's make sure we have all of our gear. So obviously we need a camera if we're going to do imaging. And what settings do we use? Now I'm using a DSLR. I like to use the RAW format as opposed to FITS RAW or CFA FITS. Simply because I'm used to working with the CR2 files from the DSLR. If I ever want to take any of these images, single frames, and do something in Lightroom or Photoshop, I'm more familiar with the CR2 than I am with FITS. So it just, for now, that's what I'm using. When I switch over to a dedicated Astro imaging camera, that might be monochrome, might be a one-shot color, I'm not sure yet. That's a ways away. I'll probably end up switching to a different format. Mirror settle time. If you remember my SGP attempt videos, this was causing me fits. So, I could go to 1 second, but it was just causing me too many issues. Plate solving frame was basically coming up as that duration, whether it be 1 second, 5 seconds, whatever I had it set to. And because it was so dim, it couldn't plate solve. So I currently have this set to 0, which means disabled. Don't use this. Don't use that function. And binning. So it's a DSLR. We don't use that. So we just leave that as a 1x1. Again, this is specific to how I use SGP. Clearly if you hover over anything, it gives you a nice little flyout box that'll describe what that is. So if you're using something else, feel free to experiment. But again, this is my settings and my workflow, so anybody that's using a DSLR should be able to use my settings and at least get you in the ballpark of being able to take some decent images. So with that, we're going to go OK. Now I don't have any onboard cooling on the camera, so that section isn't needed. The gain isn't needed because, again, it's a DSLR. Warm up, cool down. These are check marked by default. I've left them there. It really doesn't matter because there is no cooling, so we can't really do too much about that. Settings and specs: the angle, scale, pixels, readout noise. I'm not sure. I have yet to be able to find readout noise documentation on the DSLR. The angle, the best way to find the angle. So I'm going to move this up over here, and I'm going to open an image. Let's go to data drive, SGP. So let's open up this image here. This was one taken the other night, M103. Open start cluster here in the middle. And let's do a plate solve. Plug in the name. Don't worry about the RA or DEC. or the angle. We really don't need the angle to start. We could just do a blind solve, but I do know my scale. The calculated scale is a 0.392, I believe, but I know, we went over that before in another video. So let's do a solve. Alright, it selected, or it successfully, I should say, solved the frame. Has the Orion deck. Again, we didn't input that information. The angle is 85 degrees and the scale is 0.4. So I'm not going to use this option down here, but we need to remember these two things, 85 degrees and a scale of 0.4. So we'll close that. So let's change our angle to 85. Now, if you remember from my setup video, I keep everything connected, so that should never change unless I bump something. And that is used in other things when we're trying to do the mosaic tools and other sections of sequence generator. It's good information to have in there. You really don't need it. You could leave it as 0 or whatever value you wanted. My scale is 0.4 pixels. Now, I know my camera is 6,000 by 4,000, but if we wanted to find that information out, we go to the manufacturer's specifications, and in the case of the Canon DSLRs, a lot of the information, you kind of have to go to other websites, in this case imagingresource.com. And as we scroll down, I think I showed you this before, you can see that the pixel size is 3.72 microns and my max resolution is 6,000 by 4,000. So that's where I got that information from. Now, it would be great if it would give me the readout noise value as well, but unfortunately it doesn't. I've never seen in my testing the high-speed download work, at least for my DSLR, so I leave that unchecked. Filters, I have no filters. Again, I'm using a DSLR, so there's no need for filters. I could if I wanted to, but it's really not needed. Focus. If I had an autofocuser installed, this is where I would configure that, but I don't have one, so it's not something that I'm familiar with. It is on my bucket list of things to eventually get, but for now, I don't have it. My telescope. It's a Celestron. If I had it connected, the COM port would show up here. I could go into advanced, but all you really need to do is make sure the COM port's right. Now the problem with that is every time I go to set up, usually it's a different COM port, so I always have to go in and select it. But you don't have to do it through this panel. Other than that, I leave everything else pretty much the same. High-speed nudge. I don't reverse these. I'm not in the south or the southern hemisphere, so I leave these unchecked because it doesn't seem to affect anything. My options. Park when sequence completes. That's very important. If I've found that if you did not park, or if I do not park the mount when the sequence completes, it just basically stops tracking. Now, what that means is that it tells PhD to disconnect. And when that happens, the telescope goes into its own mode of tracking, and the next thing you know, your telescope is upside down because it was trying to track on its own. So I like to make sure that it's going to go to the park so that it normalizes and the mount won't move after that. Stop tracking when the sequence completes. I leave that unchecked. I'm parking, so it doesn't matter. Allow external control of the telescope. I leave it checked just in case, but I've never had to use that, so it is what it is. Auto Meridian flip, very important. A lot of the Meridian flips for me happen, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. The whole point of using SGP is to start it, make sure everything's running, you're capturing some data, and go take a nap, get some sleep, do what have you. I don't want to have to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning and have to do a Meridian flip on my own. I check mark that box, go into set, minutes past Meridian to flip. Now, each manufacturer or each mount manufacturer will give you a specification of how, or should be giving you a specification of how far past the Meridian can your mount go before it's going to hit some type of a stop, whether it be a physical stop inside the gearbox or the camera hitting a tripod leg type of situation. In the case of the CGEMII, I believe it's a couple degrees or roughly 10 minutes worth of time. So I set it to 3. I had it set to 0, but for some reason, if I set it to 0, approaching the Meridian, tracking was a little wonky, and then once it did the flip and start tracking again, the tracking was wonky again to begin with, and I would lose about 20 minutes worth of data, 10 to 20. So setting this to 3 minutes past the flip, setting this to 3, all of a sudden it was fine. I didn't have the tracking issues for some reason. Seemed a little odd to me. But I set it to 3. It works fine. These other ones, I don't wait for the Meridian. I don't pause. Auto center, so it's going to do it's not going to assume it's in the right spot. I want it to take a plate saw frame and make sure it's centered and adjust if need be. And then I don't remember changing that. Okay, so that's it with the Meridian flip. Sync behavior, I leave it as sync. Mount settling time, this is, when it does a dither, or, it does the plate solve and auto center. How long do you want that mount to stop shaking because, it did the Meridian flip and now it's moved and there might be some residual vibrations. So I found 5 seconds is a decent range. I could probably go a little bit tighter, but 5 seconds is good. And then the scope focal length. The EdgeHD 11-inch is 2800 millimeter native, but I have the 0.7 focal reducer, which brings that down to 1960. Plate solve. So I'm using a web service, astrometry.net, as my plate solving. That means I have to have an internet connection in order for plate solving to work. I have attempted to install local plate solving software, but I have yet to get it to work. If I ever do get it to work, I'll try to remember how I got it to work. I'll put up a video for that, but for now, I just haven't been able to get it to work. So I keep it on astrometry.net. My settings for that, real simple. And the blind settings. So if it fails on a regular and it needs to go to a blind, where's it going to go to? Well, it's going to go to the same place. It's kind of redundant in my setup. But if I was using a local, say PlateSolve 2, and that failed and it needed to do a blind, then it would go up to astrometry.net. Frame and center, 1600 ISO at a 15-second exposure works pretty well. With the DSLR, 3200 can get a little grainy. If 15-second exposure works, why would we go to 30? You know, it's not like we're using it for data crunching later on. Set your exposure to as low as you can go and still be able to plate solve reliably. And let's see, scope centering. Attempt to center rotate 6 times. With refractors and shorter focal length, you can probably go tighter. Mentioned that in previous video, where our error can be like 50. But at the long focal length, 1960 millimeters, you know, you need an ultra fine motor on your mount, which the CGEMII doesn't have. So, you know, I need to open up the error to 250, and usually within 2 or 3 tries. Usually on the second try, it's within that tolerance, and as you can see here, you know, it's pretty well centered. So 6 times is on the outside, but usually within 2 or 3 it makes it. If I wanted to make this real tight so that it was only, say, 50 pixels error, then I need to bump this up to like 20 or something like that, which is just a waste of imaging time. Since we're going to be dithering, it's going to be moving around anyways. The final crop on the image is going to be tight. I like the 250. It works pretty well. Next, use filter. So when it's trying to center, if I had a filter wheel, which obviously I don't, we would select that and do the drop down and use blind solve failover. Again, that was that setting up here. I'm not using it. Auto guide. Different options for an auto guider. I personally use PhD2. A couple videos ago I went through my settings and using PhD2. So when you need to make sure that PhD2 is set up, you know, it should start the server, and then this will allow it to connect to it, or that will allow SGP to connect to PhD2, excuse me. And as you can see, as soon as I clicked on settings, it opened up PhD2 for me, and the server started. So, you know, there is an interoperability there. You just got to point to the right path on your machine and which equipment profile you need to use, and then open and connect gear. When the sequence starts, I usually connect the gear manually, simply because if I wait for SGP to try to connect to it, and let's say I walk away and I'm cooking dinner and it's 30 minutes before I get back and I noticed, oh, it can't connect to the mount. PhD can't connect to the mount. You know, do I wait and finish my dinner and waste imaging time, or do I go out and let my dinner get cold and try to troubleshoot the telescope? Get it all done, connect manually, when I get everything hooked up and powered up, make sure it's connected to it, just let it sit there. And then this is just a redundant checkbox in case I had forgotten to do that. And then when the sequence is done, disconnect. Let me close out of PhD. Settling options, settle at 0.5 pixel for 10 seconds. That would be something that is passed on to or from PhD. PhD will report back that it's 1 pixel away. And then once it gets below 0.5 pixel and it stays there for 10 seconds, SGP will consider, and PhD has told SGP that the tolerance is less than 0.5 pixel, and if that tolerance has been reported for 10 seconds, SGP will start the next image. Stop guiding when the sequence completes. And the other one that I don't use a lot, these options, I've never really tested them, especially like settle the guider before the autofocus frame. I don't have an autofocus, so it's not something I need to worry about. I don't have an off-axis guider. Recalibrate auto guider when target changes. I do that one simply because I might be pointing more north than I am the equator, and when you're in different areas of the sky, your guide settings can change. So I like to ensure that the auto guider recalibrates itself for each target. Lastly, we have other. I don't have a flat box. I don't have a rotator. I don't have an observatory. So this tab isn't needed. Equipment Profile Manager. So pretty much everything we went through is in here. Now, what you can do is select one of the templates. Again, pretty much everything is the same, right? And this is what I did, was I used the Canon template. I know it's an EOS. I do my settings in there, set my angle, set my scale, set all the parameters and the various options that we just went over. So, how do you want the files to be named? We go into the key, what's the target name? So we would do %TN _ exposure length, so %EL. Maybe I want the date and time, who knows. And then once I've done that, I change my name up here. Let's go to test, profile, and we save it. And there it is. Now if I wanted to, I could set this to be the default. So anytime I create a new sequence, it would use this one. But obviously I'm not going to be doing that, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And let's look at my focal reducer config. As you can see, a lot of the information is the same. Park the telescope. Use Meridian flip. 3 minutes after. Auto center after. High speed nudge. Settling time. Focal length. Again, the COM port. It's not connected right now on my camera. It's an EOS, raw, 1x1, no mirror settle. All of this good data, all of these settings that I just showed you in the other screen are in here. This is just saving that information as a profile so that we can go back, and if we need to create a new sequence, we have it. We don't have to add that each and every time. After that, we have the sequencer. So let's look at a new sequence. So let's go new sequence with profile, and it's going to ask, but I'm going to cancel that. Let's do just a new sequence. Canon EdgeHD 0.7 FR config. That was my default profile. That's what it used. And then you'll see Ryan home, which let me go look at that. Nope. User profile manager is where that is stored. I have my home there. Clearly this is YouTube. I'm not going to click on it because you have to put in your lat and long and all that good information, right? So if you have a GPS unit on your mount, you should be able to auto-populate that, but this is good because when sequence generator or when SGP wants to slew to a target, if it knows where the mount is, then it should know where to point in the sky and get pretty close, and then the auto center will take over. So in this particular instance, my elevation, I'm not exactly sure, but the sight lat and long, go out with your cell phone to where your telescope is sitting, and that connects to all the satellites, and that should be able to get you your lat and long. If you're using Google Maps or whatever, you should be able to extract that information from your phone. So let's close that out. Other than that, as far as the other options in here, really don't use it. Okay, so that's the configuration of the equipment and the location in SGP. So let's look at these panels. By default, this is not what it looks like. This is how I like to look at things. So to look at that, we go up here to docking modules, and you can see we have a whole host. So if I had a flat box, I could put a panel up for that. What does that look like? I don't have a flat box, so I don't need that. Sequence, focus control. If I had a autofocuser, I could bring that over here and pop it in, but I don't have it, so I'm going to minimize it. So what do I have here? Well, we have the histograms. This is important information to have so that you can see what your image data looks like and how everything's spread out. There's more detailed information on how to read a histogram out there. But it's just nice to see this information, and how the humps are. The auto stretch, I like, we can turn auto stretch off. Doesn't seem to make that much of a difference live anyways. Excuse me. But I like to just do auto stretch low. And it's just all this is what the image results in. So that's good enough for when I'm just making sure things are running. I know an approximation of, moon's out, I should have a little bit of grayness, or should look a lot darker. A PhD2 graph, So you'll get the little pattern going across. Again, that's communicated from PhD2 up to SGP. The sequence. What is the current target? How many frames are we expecting to take? How many events do we have? We'll get into that in a little bit, but if you've watched some of the previous videos, you'll see that you might have 4 targets, and each target has 2 events, so that would be 8 events. And then 4 targets, 8 events, each event 100 images, so that would be 800 frames. And this is the total. And then over here we have, let's say the target is M101, 2 events, 1 event's completed. It's on frame or event 2, so many frames. And it gives you how much run time it needs. Again, if you hover over it, it explains it pretty well for you. Over here on the right hand side, my telescope information. What's my current RA and deck, time to peer flip. That's good information to have. If you know, that way you know if you're going to need a Meridian flip or not, and at what time is it going to happen. With the auto Meridian flip, do I need to be up for it? No, but if I am, I can watch it and geek out a little bit. When I set the telescope to home after I've got it all auto-aligned as far as the StarSense and everything, I always go back to home, and every once in a while I'll do a set park. That way it remembers what these values are, because what these values are, the RA and deck, that is where it's going to park it. So when the checkbox park the mount when the sequence completes, this is where it's going to go to. Okay, so you have to set that to something that's relatively, in my case, home, which is pointing towards Polaris. And then once it does park, this will say unpark, and that's key because the past 3 days I've had relatively clear skies, except for the first night. There were some clouds that moved in. It's not overly hot, not overly cold, so I left the telescope out, just covered it up during the day. So what did that mean? It meant I got 3 nights of imaging in. I didn't have to polar align each night. I could leave the everything but the dew heaters powered on, and all I needed to do was just change my sequence for the next night and hit run, and then it waited. Now the first night completed, it parked the telescope. I went to run it the second day, hit the run, and it gave me a warning saying, the telescope's parked, do you want to start it? And I clicked OK, but it didn't do anything. So I had to actually unclick the button here where it says park right now. It said unpark at that point. Okay, so I had to unpark, then run the sequence. And so on the third night, when I did that, it was all happy. I clicked run sequence at like 5 o'clock in the evening, and after hitting unpark, and at 6:30, when the sequence was set to start, it went the rest of the night, no intervention on my part. It was actually pretty awesome. Image statistics, bunch of information here I don't fully understand yet. But what I do like, stars found. So if you remember, we had, I forget where that was now. Stars found, I like that simply because it will, you know, in this image, have it here? No. Anyways, you know, if I'm seeing 232, 235, and then all of a sudden I see one something, you know, I know something was messed up with that frame. Why? Oh, well, clouds moved in or something to that effect. The half flux radius, you know, we want that value as low as possible. So if I'm seeing consistently 5.5, 6, and then all of a sudden it jumps to a 9, something happened. So, you know, do I have dew on this on there? Did it get out of focus? You know, any number of things can occur, but it's an indicator. Watch the next frame. Oh, it dropped back down. Just one bad frame. It might have been a tracking issue. Ideal exposure time, obviously, I can't calculate that because I don't have the, you know, that E- value configured, because just can't find it for the DSLR at this point. Image history, just a graph based on the last few images that it's taken per series. So when it changes targets, this will reset to the current target. And then pan and zoom. It's just a nice little picture. You know, if we zoomed in to say 200, as you can see, the orange box changed, and we can select different areas of the image. And that's pretty much it as far as my settings for Sequence Generator Pro. So with that, as far as this video is concerned, have a good rest of your day. I appreciate all my subscribers and everybody watching, and clear skies. Goodbye.